Boom. We are recording. Today I have on Tim Berzins of the Amplified Vitality YouTube channel. Now, I consider Tim an expert on many things, but most recently, he's used his nutrition consultation as a backdoor to get some of his clients to actually deal with the real issues holding them back in life. So, we're going to talk a little bit about how nutrition can help you in your performance in all aspects of life, specifically business. But first, I want to thank you, Tim, coming on and spending your Saturday talking with me.
Definitely, man. I'm excited. I love doing podcasts. I love having good conversations with people. Honestly, I think that's where the most learning comes from. Like if you go and read articles and stuff, that's great. But like when you have a good conversation that you get to really bounce ideas off of each other and share some things and reach deeper levels, that's just the best.
Yeah, I agree. And that's definitely the main reason I wanted to talk to you is so Tim and I have been friends for a few years now, but he definitely stands out to me as someone who I consistently, the level of conversation I have when I talk to Tim about some, I guess, more serious, for lack of a better word, life issues. It's just I always come away with something profound from speaking with him. So I was really excited to get him on and record some of his thoughts. And right before we got on our press record, Tim, you were talking about this idea of beliefs and how they can affect you. And specifically, you were saying that if someone has a belief around a practice in their life, in this case, some nutritional practice, it can really start to, damage their life or amplify any positive beliefs or sort of positive reinforcement they have going on. Could you kind of continue with that thought and tell us how maybe people can use this to improve their life?
Yeah, for sure. So there's obviously like real science that has, like different molecules will interact in different ways within your body. So
Yeah.
that aspect of nutrition is super important. But I kind of consider that as like the in the game type of thing, whereas the mindset and the perception of your nutrition is really like out of the game. So for like business people, you can kind of think about the difference of working in your business versus working on your business. So when you start to work on your business, you're starting to act as manager. You're starting to be the person who's now organizing the pieces so that the system can run on its own and create the outcome that you want. So the systems running are in the game. So in that sense, nutrition is like very, very important. You want to make sure you're eating the right foods for the right outcomes that you want. However, when you step back outside of that and you connect the way that your mental perspective and especially the way that the emotional energy plays within your physiology and within your cellular makeup, then you can start to see how when you eat something every single day that has some sort of unconscious belief, or you take a supplement or something that has some sort of unconscious belief or even conscious belief that this is good for me or that this is bad for me, either way, that basically what you're doing is you're practicing that energy every single day. You wake up, you take the pill, I'm doing something good for me. Next day, wake up, take the pill, I'm doing something good for me. You're practicing this energy that it's almost becomes the point that the placebo effect alone from believing that you're doing something good for you will create the outcome that something good is happening for you, even if the thing you're taking is a sugar pill.
Okay. This is so interesting. While you were saying this, the in the business, on the business, I was like, trying to figure out this analogy. But when you started saying the belief and how placebo can be strong, that's when this idea kind of clicked for me. So are you saying that like, because I think I've had this happen before where I'll eat something that I think is good for me and I'll have a lot of positive associations with it. And then maybe for whatever reason, I'll, have guilt around that behavior or activity. If it's a food, maybe I'll have guilt around it. Like, this isn't a hardcore of enough diet food, or I'll read something that makes me think, oh, this actually isn't good. It is bad. And then I have had that experience where something that in the past was working well for me, when my beliefs kind of changed around it, stopped working well. So I can kind of picture this, but for people who are listening, can you give me an example of how this would work for someone, like how it's worked for one of your clients, your experience with it, like a day-to-day example of this actually happening with nutrition?
Yeah. So a really good way to think about it, I think I like this phrase, this model that works, is that you could be both getting a lot more enjoyment out of the foods that are good for you, and you could be getting a lot more benefit from the foods that you enjoy. So it's kind of this reverse flip thing going on where people think that, broccoli and chicken breast, dried chicken breast. That's good for me. That's what I got to do. And they don't enjoy it really, but they're doing it because it's good for them. And then they're like, oh, this, chocolate bar, this is delicious, but it's not good for me at all. So they kind of like separate these two things in these categories. Well, if you just allowed yourself to truly enjoy the chocolate bar without feeling that you need to, punish yourself later on because you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing, well, the guilt that you're creating from eating that is having an energetic effect within your cells. So now that energetic effect is going to turn into some sort of manifestation of a disease, because on an unconscious level, you believe that you need to be punished for this bad thing that you're doing by enjoying this chocolate bar. And so if you let that go, you can get a lot more benefit from the nutrients in the chocolate bar that you wouldn't be getting if you were feeling that guilt. Now, similarly, you're eating this dry chicken breast and you're doing it because it's good for you, but you're actually blocking the fact that you could be enjoying it. You could find the aspects of the chicken breast that you enjoy, and then maybe from that sparks these new ideas of how you can cook it in a certain marinade that makes it more delicious, or certain spices that make it more delicious. And so you basically come out of this idea that you need to punish yourself into your results, and instead you can enjoy your way to the results, because really that's the point. Like if you think about any sort of progress in life, we have this, intellectually heady way of approaching life where it's like we need to reach A, B, C, D, E, we need to reach Z, we need to get to the end of the alphabet. And that's not really a good way to approach it, because so if we're creating all this suffering and pain in life just to reach the end goal, well, then what's really the point of life? Just to go through all this suffering to achieve some external outcome that means nothing? Or is it to enjoy the unfoldment of the process, to enjoy the seed turning into the flower, into the bloom that now opens up into the full flower as the final manifestation? So there's this process that's like, once you understand that the point of it is to go through the process and enjoy the unfolding of the process rather than to get to some external outcome, now you're in a position where you can actually start to get more benefit from things you like, and you can start to like things that you're getting benefit from.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I'm wondering about how you can explain this and make it super concrete for people, because what I'm hearing is that, especially with some of these negative emotions you're generating internally, like this chocolate bar, I feel guilt about it, or I'm not enjoying eating this healthy food while I'm eating it. Like these are negative emotions. And my understanding is that a lot of these emotions come from thoughts we have, and vice versa. They can generate thoughts as well. So how are these negative emotions physically affecting you? Because I know some people might not be well-versed in ideas of things like, energy from these emotions radiating out and affecting your body. Like, how do you explain that to clients or other people that want to know, like, okay, well, why does an emotion matter? Why does that actually physically affect my health?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's really the first barrier to getting people to understand this kind of stuff. It's the mind-body connection, and so many people, or we've been for so long as a society, stuck in our heads, thinking that we're this separate entity, this small little man inside of the brain that's controlling the body as this separate thing. But the truth is, the body actually is as much of a brain as your actual brain is. You have these different centers of the body that you can feel start to close whenever some sort of negative emotion comes on, if you're sensitive to it. If you're afraid, there's a very physical response in your body. And so you could be laying in bed at night, afraid of this outcome that might happen, worried about your bills, or worried about, what so-and-so is going to say the next day at work or something like that. Well, you can feel that in your body. You know that something's happening. Your adrenaline's spiking. Your cortisol is spiking. These are hormones that are the stress hormones. And normally animals in the wild will feel this whenever they have some sort of immediate stress, like, a gazelle in the wild and sees a lion. Cortisol turns on, adrenaline turns on, amplify all these immediate systems so that we can get away from the danger. Well, you're doing that when you're laying in bed, in your comfy bed, and you're doing it all the time because you're holding on to those negative things and not allowing yourself to release and relax, therefore dropping those stress hormones and coming back into that truly rested and healthy state. And that's really, on my channel, that's what I talk the most about, is that there are really these two different functions of the organism. There's the stress metabolism and there's the respiratory metabolism. And the respiratory metabolism is what produces the most efficient amount of energy from glucose, from carbohydrate. And what happens is when a stress comes on to this system and kind of knocks the balance of the system off, rather than your entire body acting as a unified organism that can communicate with itself and have all these things coherently working together, all the systems start to kind of break apart and become individual. You kind of start to revert from this complex human that has all these systems together into a bunch of individual cells that can't really talk to each other and don't have a unifying energy. And similarly, what we see is that, through evolution from the bacterial anaerobe that we all started from, they used what I call the stress metabolism. They use the glycolytic metabolism. But as you build the blocks and become more complex through evolution, you have to start creating energy in more efficient ways. And so that's where the respiration, the Krebs cycle and electron transport chain, all of those ways of producing energy that are much more efficient, that's why they started to evolve. And those will stop functioning when stress knocks the system down and degrades your unified system into a bunch of individual systems that aren't communicating properly. So all of that's really connected to the way that you're perceiving things, the way that you allow the emotions to affect you. And I think it's a very interesting thing for people to start to realize that what you eat definitely has an effect on all of these systems, but that's really the raw material. And then you have to use the signal of your perception of reality to decide, well, what am I going to do with all this raw material? If I'm constantly living in fear because I'm a nervous person, I'm holding on to this anxiety and worry, well, then, what is my physiology going to be as a very baseline level? It's going to be much higher in adrenaline. It's going to be much higher in cortisol. All these stress hormones are going to be higher, and you're not going to be using the food that you're eating in the proper way. So there's both input and then what your body does with it, the output. And you have to get both those things right.
Yeah. I think that makes it a little more concrete for people. So what it sounds like you're saying is that these stress states that can be onset by these negative feelings degrade the body's ability to function coherently. And it sounds like you also said that when the body's functioning coherently, that's when it's functioning in this higher state where you're talking about stress versus unstressed metabolism. It's the state where your body's more effectively utilizing calories. In general, it's not trying to conserve calories. It's using them for all the things that are important, like thinking, controlling your behavior, all the fun things like warm body temperature and actually having a functioning sex drive, like all the good things that happen when your body is not in conservation mode, when your body is coherent.
Exactly.
And the way that you're saying to do that is to make sure that you're avoiding these stress states. So one thing that's interesting about this, from my point of view, is like, if you're doing these things to keep yourself relaxed and out of these stress states, and it's making your body use what you're eating, more effectively, then why does it matter what you're actually eating? Like we talked about the negative and positive emotional response to some of the things you might be eating or nutrition or behaviors. Well, it's like, why does it even matter then what we're doing? And how do you explain that to clients? Because I'm sure that'd be a question people, have popping up.
That's definitely one that as you start to go down that rabbit hole, it becomes a barrier that you definitely need to start to sit with and start to, ask that question and start to come to new realizations. And the best way that I would put it is that the chemical stress that you place on your body through poor nutrition is still a stress. And so if you were someone who, say that you were completely free of emotional negativity and your body was coherently working and all systems were firing well. Well, in that state, you could eat, say something that was really unhealthy for you, and your body would handle it in a really appropriate way that wouldn't have a big negative effect on you. However, would you want to keep eating this food that's hurtful to you if you're in this positive state? Of course not. If you don't hold on to the emotional negativity, and you have released the guilt and that unconscious need for punishment, why would you choose something that is going to hurt your body? You wouldn't. And if you did continue to choose it over time, then you're continually reintroducing this possibility of that chemical stress knocking your system out of whack. Now, on the flip side of things, you could be eating the most healthy diet in the world and be completely negative in all of your emotions. And therefore your body's not using all those nutrients properly at all. And so it really comes down to balancing both of those things, where you still need the raw material for your body to organize it appropriately based on the energy that you have, the emotional state that you're in. But it really requires you looking at both sides of the coin to make sure that you're actually getting the most health benefit, to get the outcome that you really want in life.
Okay. That totally makes sense. So it's like stress, regardless of where it's from, it matters. It's real, and it's a real chemical like happening in your body, if it's from emotions or if it's from the food that you intake.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. That totally makes sense. So, I mean, I think all this is really important too, regardless of what you're doing, because I think most people can agree that energy management and how you're using your energy is so important to whatever you want to accomplish. So, I think it's interesting that people aren't really willing to get into some of these more nuanced conversations about things like nutrition and emotions, given that, you know, anything you're going to do, whether it's for work or just some personal goal, is going to be dependent on those types of things: how you're feeling, how you wake up every day, you know, how you're showing up for things. Even something, if it's just purely for work, it's like you have to be able to sit there and concentrate and knock work tasks out. And it's like that's not going to happen if you have these negative things in your head or coming in your body from your
Yeah,
food.
and one of the biggest things is that through the letting go process, which is really the process of letting go of those negative emotions, it's not
Mm-hmm.
just something that is separated from the rest of your life. It's intimately involved with all of your life. The way
Yeah.
that you work is because of a certain emotional state. And if you let go of the negativity around it, you become 10 times more effective immediately at your job. You can actually now accomplish a task that would have taken you 3 days in half a day, because now you're actually focused on what needs to be done. You're not distracted and unconsciously blind to all of this periphery that actually has no real context, no real importance in the actual task that you're trying to complete. And so like
Mm-hmm.
that's true in work, in the sense of work. That's true in nutrition. That's true in your relationships. That's true in every avenue of your life. The negativity is blinding your perception from the truth, and so therefore preventing your ability to actually be as effective as you possibly could be.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up too, because we were talking about letting go before we started recording. And for all of you that don't know, that's a book by, it's David R. Hawking, correct? Is that right,
Yeah,
Tim?
Dr. David Hawkins. Yeah, yeah.
So he wrote a great book called Letting Go. He also wrote another book, probably his most famous, called Power versus Force, and then a number of other books on related topics, which Tim has gotten into quite a few of his books, I believe. And one of his most interesting ideas is that by letting go of negative emotions, you know, this negative emotionality you may have, regardless of where it's from, can be from long ago in your life, it can be from really recently. Regardless, he talks about how releasing these emotions can have profound effect on just your level of awareness, but then also your health and vitality and how you show up in the world. So one thing I think is interesting about that is trying to make this concrete again, Tim. How do you think letting go of these emotions can help people improve their performance, whether that's for work or things like athletics? Like actually, you know, how could, if somebody wants to get ripped or somebody wants to get in crazy shape, how can like letting go of these negative emotions and things help them out?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that when you recognize how negative emotions work,
Mhm.
so let's step even further back than that,
Okay.
because one of the biggest things to help people understand is that even if you could talk to a million people right now who would say like, oh yeah, I'm a happy person, totally happy person, and
Yeah.
yet if you were to be able to dive under the surface and actually get them to look at themselves and be completely honest, they would find a lot more negativity than they maybe would be willing to admit. So
Hmm.
that's the first step. If you're not even willing to recognize that you have negative emotions, that or that you have emotions, because most people think that they're just this thinking organism, and the truth
Yeah.
is you're both a thinking and a feeling organism. That's that whole thing about your
Yeah.
body is also part of who you are. Your body is part of your brain, and the emotional reactions of your body is actually part of who you are. So pay attention to that. Start to become aware of that. So
Yeah.
as you do that, yeah, what you start to see is that not only are you a thinking, feeling organism, you're also not a thinking organism that feels. You're actually a feeling organism that thinks. So what
Mm.
that means is when you're connected with positive emotions, you're in alignment with who you truly are and what you truly are. Now your thinking acts as this maneuvering around this aligned line so that you can kind of move around like that. Without that alignment of the emotions in that line, your thinking can go in all these different directions that aren't actually, again, I'll use the word in alignment. They're not actually in alignment with the outcomes that you're trying to create in your life. So as far as, athletes or business people are trying to get in shape and things like that, from the physical health perspective, your body functions better when it's not holding on to negativity. In the Eastern medicine systems like acupuncture or the chakra systems, they call these plexi of nerves that go all the way up the spine as those energy centers, and that when you release a certain emotion, you release those things. To anyone who's super science minded and not open to those ideas, that sounds like, hippy dippy crap, but like
Okay.
the truth is, like, as you start to look at the science behind it, they're actually not wrong. They're coming from a different perspective for sure, but by incorporating their opinion into the Western scientific model, you start to see that by changing those emotions, you actually are having a physiological effect in your body, which again is apparent to anyone who's ever felt a negative emotion. You feel it in your body. I like to use this example of if you really right now put yourself in an imaginary state, you're sitting on your couch, you get up from your couch and you walk over to your fridge. Now you feel the fridge, you feel the door of it, and you feel like the weight, and you pull and you hear the sound of it opening. You take out the lemon. This is all as vivid as possible. You feel the texture of the lemon. You slice the lemon open, you see the juice squeezing in it, and then you go and you bite down on the lemon. Your salivary glands actually react. You actually have a salivary response to this imaginary thing that's happening. Mm-hmm. So that's actually happening all the time. We're constantly imagining the future and fearing the future and then reliving the past. So we're constantly reactivating our imaginations to put our bodies in that physiological state as if that stress is happening right now, even though it happened 20 years ago. And if you don't actually let go of those negative emotions, then you end up coming to a place where you have now decided that this is just the way reality is. So your perception of reality becomes a prison for you, and you're looking through the bars, not even seeing the bars, because you're looking out there and saying, I'm trapped in here, and you don't even see the fact that you're locked in this prison. And not only that, you don't realize that you are the one who put the bars there to begin with. And the bars, it's like that, I don't know if you've seen the picture of, they have like a horse and they tie him up to a tree, and they do that every single day, to the point where now they tie the horse up and they don't even connect the leash to the tree at all. The horse could run away, but he just believes that that's the way reality is that I can't leave. And so he doesn't leave. So that's the exact same thing that we're doing with emotions all the time. We don't believe we're capable of something, or we don't believe we could do something, or we just believe that this is the way reality works, when in fact, that's not really true. That's only a belief that you've continued to perpetuate that's created your model of reality, your model of thinking in the world. So when people are trying to achieve their goals, if they can release some of these limiting beliefs that are stopping them from seeing the truth of the situation, well, instead of going from trying to get from one point to another through this scattered route that goes all over the place, well, now you see clearly, I don't need to go around all here. I can just go from here to here. Boom. I got it. Done. The negative emotions throw your balance off and blind you to the simple and effective truth that is right in front of you to achieve your goals. You can have it all much easier if you're able to see more clearly.
Yeah, man, there's so much I want to ask, because I love this, because you started out like super concrete with the idea that it's almost like, the first thing you kind of got into is the idea that emotions frame your thinking, not the other way around. You can't think your way out of different emotions. You can't think around them. The prison cell you're in, or the looking glass that you're looking through, is framed by your emotions. Until you fix those, you're not going to see anything else besides what you see. Yep. But when you do, you may have a completely different perspective. You might actually be looking through a different looking glass. You might be looking in a completely different direction. You may have a completely new perspective and ways of thinking. You might be thinking different thoughts once the underlying emotions change. And I think that's interesting, because it kind of can open up in a very concrete way new possibilities in your life. I feel like a lot of times when people hear the analogy of being in bars or behind bars, they're like, okay, like, check, I create my own mental roadblocks, but like, what does that mean? How do I get outside of them? And I think the thing you have to understand is that there's no way to think outside of them. And I think that's what Tim is trying to get at. You can't think outside of them. There's nothing you're going to think in your head that's going to be outside of what you're thinking. Until your emotional basis for what you're thinking changes, you won't think anything else. So how do we change that emotional basis, Tim? Like, what's a concrete way? How do people notice their emotions? Because, like, to me, the idea of thinking and realizing an emotion is difficult, because I don't know that it's something you can really think about in the way you think about, like, writing on a piece of paper or something.
Yeah, it's awareness. It's all about practicing awareness. So that, I mean, that's what every single spiritual, religious doctrine is all about. It's basically, as you become more aware to who and what you truly are and what this reality truly is, then you start to become more and more aware of how everything is beautifully, amazingly good. And there really isn't a need to exist in a negative state unless you're choosing to do so. A lot of people aren't ready to hear that because it sounds, to someone who is dealing intimately with and very much stuck in this very negative place, that makes it sound like, oh, it's your fault, get over it. And that's not it at all. What it is just a re-empowering of yourself to be able to get outside of those things by taking responsibility for your consciousness. The things that you experience in your consciousness, you have a choice. You have the Viktor Frankl quote, the last of every human right is to choose how you perceive any situation. So at the end of the day, you have to take responsibility for your consciousness and say, how do I wish to perceive this? That doesn't mean that you go from 0 to 100 and you're in this complete like depression, and then the next day you wake up and you're just jolly happy. Of course not. Like
Yeah.
there's a process here, like it takes a while to move that up. But if consistently day in, day out, just like we said before, when you're eating that food and you feel guilty day in, day out, or you're taking the pill and you're feeling good about it, about how you're doing something good for your health day in, day out, you practice that skill of being happy basically, and you start to let it go. Now, the other thing I'll say here is that sometimes when you're stuck in a negative emotion, you can let it be there and just try to become aware of it, and it's not going to budge. It's just going to stay there, and you're going to feel like you're doing something wrong. And I think the way to understand this most efficiently is to understand the difference between content and context, which is really to say which the content is the thoughts, what the thoughts are saying. The context is, how do the thoughts feel? Do I really want to continue feeling this thought? Is this thought serving me? Or is the little thought that's speaking, am I attached to the content of what it's saying? And when you do that, you begin to become aware that you are aware. You know what I mean? You start to realize that if I think this thought, then there's this emotion that comes up within me, and I don't want to experience this emotion anymore. So I'll let the thought be there, but I'm not going to continue to empower it by believing in it and by attaching it as something that I want to continue to perpetuate. So it really comes down to seeing the difference between the context and the content, and really staying as that, as the spiritual doctrines will say, the spacious awareness. If you can remain the awareness and just allow all of the things, the pieces of reality that are coming, flickering in and out of the space of awareness, allow them to be, then you start to see things from a much higher perspective. And therefore you can choose not to continue to perpetuate negativity, rather than getting caught in the fear or the grief or the depression or the anger or whatever it is, because you're believing what the content of the thought is telling you.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think of a good example, because okay, so when you're saying context versus content, by content you mean what is the content of this thought, like what is it saying right now, and then context is like what else is going on that's causing this, like why is it happening? Is that?
Yeah, and context, I mean, context ultimately is like the awareness of the present moment, whereas the content is like the mental stuff that exists within time. So we used the example before of the animal who gets stressed on the gazelle that gets stressed in the field and sees the lion and runs away. Well, after that's done, they don't really have the mental capacities that we do, where we can project ourselves in the future or remember the past. So their stress response gets turned off, and they typically are pretty happy. Animals, go about their way, and when a stress comes, they do what they need to do, get away from it, come back to normal. Humans, we're going to lay in bed at night thinking about how we're worried about this outcome. Well, if you're continuing to think this thought of, so let's use an example that you don't know if you're going to be able to pay your bills tomorrow. So you're laying in bed and you're like freaking out, I don't know if I'm going to pay my bills and whatnot. You think that those thoughts are doing something for you because you need to think it through so you can come to some solution. But what you don't realize is that you're continuing to buy into thoughts that exist on the energy level of a fearful emotion. And so you're continuing to believe that thought that says, I don't have enough money, what am I going to do? I'm going to freak out, I'm going to die, I'm going to do blah, 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 all this other stuff. You're believing in that thought and therefore buying into the fear and therefore letting fear control you. When you step outside of it and you instead allow the emotion to just be there and see what the content of that thought is, then what you realize is, as you let go of that fear and let go of that thought, now there's a whole nother realm of different thoughts that you could be thinking that would actually be very solution oriented, and would actually take you directly into a place where you weren't worried about your bills anymore because you had some sort of solution or some sort of way to get out of it. But as long as you're continuing to buy into that fear, you don't have access to those thoughts. You can't find those solutions because you're trapping yourself into that emotion of fear. So really, no matter what the situation is, this is just one example, no matter what the situation is, if there's a negative emotion there, it's trapping you by limiting the thoughts that you have available to you. And there's
controlling the context of your thoughts.
And controlling the context of your thoughts. Exactly. So like if you can reframe anything into a new context and make it look different, and therefore you start to realize that the content's really not that important. If you control the context, the content will adapt to that context over time. But that requires letting go of control over the content. And that's a whole nother thing that involves that process of letting go, allowing the emotion to be there without buying into it, without trying to fix it and do something about it, but instead making it irrelevant by transcending to a higher level.
I like this. So this is really interesting because earlier in the conversation, you said, that we're these feeling bodies that are thinking. That our feelings are kind of take precedence. So it sounds like if you notice a strong emotion or you have some resistance to, something you're trying to do, that you could stop and try to understand what you're feeling, and then try to understand what those feelings, what thoughts they're causing, so that you understand both the content of what's going on in your head and you bring it into your conscious awareness, and then the content of, what emotional context, the context of what emotional context are these thoughts showing up in. Because it seems like by understanding that, it's much easier to separate which ones are giving you a useful message versus a, not useful message. And I remember this idea that David Hawking said, and I believe it is in Letting Go, where he says that emotions are just the delivery system for survival responses. So it's this idea that, like you said, with a gazelle that needs to run away, it gets this, I don't know how a gazelle experiences emotion, but I imagine it gets some strong feeling and then it runs. Instinctually, it runs away. And in humans, the same thing, like this fight or flight, these emotions you get, like with the bills, this is a survival. It is like a delivery system for a survival message. Cause it's like, if you have to pay your bills, it seems urgent. And it seems like a feeling like that is appropriate because you should do something about it. You have to pay your bills. But then, in the context of how we live our lives, we all know that ruminating on the fact that you can't pay your bills and being too caught up in that emotion to rationally develop a plan that might help you, or to let go of it because there's nothing you can do, which is probably a better course of action. So it's like separating that like bodily system almost from what you're thinking. So I don't know if you agree with that. How do you think about it? Because it seems like that explanation, like, this delivery system for survival responses makes sense. But I don't know how you think about it. I'd be interested because I know you've put a lot of time into thinking about how to deal with these things.
Yeah, it is an interesting question, and I've had some conversations with friends who have argued for we'll stick with fear because that's what one we're talking about, who have argued for the necessity of fear, that you really do need fear. And I think there's a really important thing to recognize here is that there's a different type of fear when it's the body's reaction to an external stimuli that you need to get away from, versus a psychological fear, which is completely counterproductive and doesn't help you do anything at all. The natural fear from the body is a survival mechanism based on our physical environment. You stick your hand in fire, you feel pain, so that's not good for your body. So you feel a reaction, you want to pull away from it. That's the same thing that's happening when we talk about natural fear or natural negative emotion, which is just how your body reacts to the physical environment. It wants to survive. The difference is that we have now taken what we consider our identity and we have expanded it into all of these other things. We believe that we're the mind, ultimately. We believe that we're the identity of all the things that we own. So if I have a car and I'm identified, this is my car, this is a part of who I am. Well, now if the car gets into an accident, or if it breaks down, or if I lose it, now I'm losing a part of me. So that feels like dying. And that's what the negative emotions are. The negative emotions are their death. They're a blockage of the life force that flows through the body. That's why they feel bad. And so when you lose something that you're identified with, you lose what you consider part of your identity, which feels to the body like it's dying because that's what you believe is happening right now. So ultimately, when you let all these things go, what you're coming to is a release of the ego, because the ego is this false identification with all of the things that you consider yours, that you have your possessions, that you have ownership over, and that it can include relationships where you're identified as a certain type of person, or a certain group of people, or you're identified as the one who is always funny, or you're identified as like the one who's always intelligent, or the one or even the opposite, one who's always lazy, the one who's a failure. You're identified with these things, which are just mental positions. And so you're locking yourself into that position. And every time this fear comes up that actually might be true, you're feeling those negative emotions. So it really comes down to allowing them to be there without reacting to them, which is basically like saying, when they come up, when the habitual response that you have been practicing for years and years, for your entire life, comes up, you look at the response, but you don't buy into it. You don't buy into that fear. You instead stay at the level of context and allow it to be there. And then what you start to see is that you're not your car. You can lose your car and you're going to be perfectly fine. What's going to happen to your actual experience? Well, maybe there's a little disappointment that you don't have this car that you really got a lot of joy out of, but it's not like you're dying. It's not like the end of your identity. That illusion comes from falsely identifying, which is the basis of the ego.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it makes it a lot more clear when we talk about, concrete things like the gazelle running away from the lion. What about for these, like, how do you try to help people, or how have you helped yourself with these things that seem so difficult to define, like resistance to work? I don't know how much of like Stephen Pressfield's books you've read, like The War of Art, and he talks a lot about this resistance, and it's really similar. It's this feeling that you get like physically, and you're just like, oh my God, like I'd rather be doing anything. Like I have to get away from this work. I know people experience this in all types of work. How do you approach helping someone if they're dealing with that?
Yeah, that's one that I've been working on myself a lot too, trying to understand like what that is and where the resistance comes from. Yeah. And ultimately, I think that it comes from some unconscious negative emotion that says that you have to do this, that you're attached to this outcome. I have to do this or else something bad's going to happen. Well, if you think about what energy field are you coming from with that, well, you're actually focused on the bad thing's going to happen if I don't do this. So I'm going to force myself to do it so that the bad thing doesn't happen. Well, what if instead you came from the positive aspect of looking at, this is a thing that I really love doing. And this is, and if I do this, all these great things are going to happen for me in my life. And I can look forward to all these great things. Well, when you switch your thinking into that positive state, now you're moving away from mindset, and you're moving towards mindset, which means that now you're focused on where you're going. And so you're going towards it and enjoying the entire journey, versus looking at what you're moving away from and trying to escape what you're moving away from. It's sort of like if you're driving a car, you want to look at where you're going. You want to look ahead of you so you can accurately and effectively drive the car. But if you keep looking back because you're afraid of the thing that's chasing you or something, you're not going to be able to drive effectively.
Yeah, and you're going to be miserable the whole time.
Exactly. Exactly.
This is funny though, man, because like, what would you say? Oh, maybe this is just like an antiquated thing, but a lot of people, I know this is really big in a lot of Tony Robbins stuff. Yeah, I'm just mentioning him because a lot of people know him. He's a big like self-help guy. Yeah, and he all his people, they always talk about, man, like you need to make the fear of failure like so real in your mind that it drives you the success route. And I'm guessing you don't agree with that, man. What do you think about that?
I think that all contrast has its place. And so I think that one of the basic problems is that as an organism, we are constantly desiring pleasure and resisting pain. And so that puts us in a position where we're trapped, because now pleasure has a gain over us, and pain they both have power over us. Basically, the outer world has the ability to control your internal state. When you become unafraid of contrast, unafraid of the negativity or of the fear, and you welcome it every time it comes up, because it's showing you something about yourself that you had within you that you didn't realize you had within you, and that was coloring all of your perceptions of everything in your life. So when it comes up, you say, oh, good, this is awesome, thank you, I want this to come up so that I can look at it. Because if I can look at it and release it, now not only will this subject in my life get better, every other subject in my entire life will get better, because this fear will no longer be controlling me. I am re-empowering myself to have that perception. So when we talk about the fear of failure, there is a potentially helpful way of looking at it, where it's, you look at that fear and you understand it, but you release it so that you can move forward towards success. I think that just focusing on the fear and buying into it and being so afraid that this thing might happen is not going to help you at all become successful. It's going to be, if you become successful, it's going to be through sheer willpower and effort, in spite of the fact that you're resisting success by focusing so much on failure. Because the more that you place your attention on something, the more powerful it is for you. And if you're continually placing your attention on how you might fail and how you're afraid of failing, well, now you're going to need a lot of willpower and a lot of effort to overcome that. Instead, you could just let it go, look at success, be excited for success, and let that inspire you and spur you on towards the thing that you want, rather than trying to resist and move away from the thing that you don't want.
Okay. So it sounds like you're saying that you definitely agree with the idea of focusing on potential negatives to maybe like not doing something or anything, or taking the wrong course of action.
On the context level. Because like, again, if you can see that it's coming up within you, it's almost like, I really like the term like digging up your subconscious garbage. So like the conscious is this very thin, superficial layer that is sitting on top of all of this accumulated programs that we've been trained, habituated, and conditioned throughout our lives. The Pavlov dog, that you ring the bell and it starts to salivate because it believes food's coming. Well, that's an automated response that you've trained and conditioned into this animal. We're no different. We have been completely trained and conditioned to believe certain things. If we asked a girl out when we were in middle school and we got turned down, and we used that to believe that we were an ugly, unattractive person, now throughout our entire life, we're going to be continuing to believe that we're unattractive, a terrible, unattractive person, whatever, because it has been conditioned into you by repetition. When really there's no basis of that at all. If you could let go of the conditioning, then you would realize that you can be just as attractive as anyone. It's entirely in your control. And so what we start to see is that when, talking about the subconscious programs and how they're kind of hidden from you, those are those bars we were talking about that you're looking through those bars to reality, and not realizing that those bars are preventing you from experiencing the reality you could experience. So if instead of resisting these negative emotions as they come up, you welcome them because you're so excited for the chance to release more subconscious garbage, release more of these conditioned programs that are holding you back in life, well, now you have a head start, because as soon as it comes up, you engage with it, you dive in, you say, yes, let's do this, let's release this. And by doing that, your awareness becomes expanded, because the thing that was blocking your ability to see the truth is now being removed. It's sort of like if you have a window with the sun coming through it and it's covered in mud. Well, if you start to wipe away some of the mud, some of the light comes through. But that means you have to acknowledge that the mud is there, and you have to do the work of removing it, which means you have to let the negative emotions come up, let the programs come up, and do the work of not buying into them, even though they're going to tempt you to come buy into them. And how real am I? They're going to be blaring in your face as loud as possible. You have to believe me. And you have to just be able to sit there and say, no, you're not true. I want to find the truth. What is the truth? And if you have that faith to sit there like that, you have that trust to sit there like that, then the truth will come to you. And that experience is worth every single bit of the effort that you put into that work. It is the only work worth doing, in my opinion.
Totally. Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, it sounds like you're saying you can focus on these things and go into them, but in service of letting them go, not in service of incessantly focusing on them with no goal.
You got it. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Perfect.
That's awesome, man. I like that. I like that idea, because it's sort of, I guess, it doesn't really throw out the idea of what a lot of people believe in, and that you should focus on negative. It just gives people a path to use that constructively.
I think a lot of people run into a sort of situation where they kind of think like, okay, well, I need to think positive in order to create positive outcomes. So they start to become paranoid of thinking something negative. And that's a super, it's a very easy trap to fall into. But if you think about it, what are you doing? You're engendering more fear. because you're afraid of something coming up. You're afraid of thinking a negative thought. And so ultimately you have to let go of that as well, and just allow the negative thoughts to be there and recognize that they don't have power over you unless you give them the power. And the way that you give them the power is by buying into them and thinking that what they're telling you is true.
That's so funny, because it's like the person who like only focuses on negative is pretty much the same as the person who's like hyper vigilant about not focusing on anything negative. It ends up being the exact same.
Exactly. Yeah, it's crazy too. And that's where we run into a lot of like the people who are like egoically identified with positivity culture, who are like so far in like, you have to be positive all the time. And they like will like go hunt people down who aren't being positive and be like angry that they're not being positive. It's like, okay, well, you don't get it. Like, you're not aware of what you're doing because you're actually still in a negative state. You haven't actually achieved the thing that you think that you have achieved. You're actually blind to where you are. And so like on a map, if you're trying to go from one part to another part, you need to know where you are. Otherwise, the map's not going to be useful for you. So like, you need to know where you are. You need to understand where you are. And that comes from the awareness that you're talking about.
The awareness thing is so funny. And if anyone's still listening and wondering like why we're delving into this, for me, it's because this cuts into your energy more than almost anything. I would say more than anything. I'd put it at number one. What cuts into your energy on a day-to-day basis is these uncontrolled thoughts and emotions. And it's so funny because, like you said, rubbing the mud off a window to seeing it clearly, I've had so many instances where issues come up and they feel like life or death, and they truly sort of feel like the end of the world. And then when I get through them, I look back and I'm like, dude, that was such a joke. I totally got tricked. Like, that was not that big of a deal. Nothing happened. Like, and you realize that when you look through the mud and you see out, you realize that, life is probably not going to end no matter what you're facing. And, man, do you have any other like tips?
Well, even if it does end, it's just a transition. No way. What?
Yeah. I was just asking for that transition. Like, if you have anything you found that's simple, people can start to do to catch themselves when they're not seeing clearly.
The most important thing is just to start to become aware of your feelings, which really is just about recognition. So there's two ways to do this. It's either meditation or recognition. And if you are really serious about it, then both. And ultimately, like, I know that I'm very intense about it, but like I said, from my experience and from like taking stock of the situation that we're all in as humans, living the human life in humanity, taking stock from that, this is really the only thing that's really worth doing, because it's where all joy comes from. So the idea is to either become aware in a consecutive 15, 30, 45-minute chunk where you're just continuously being aware of what's happening, all that you're doing. This is what we can consistently call meditation, which means that you stop thinking. So what are you doing when you stop thinking? You're paying attention to what your body's feeling. You're paying attention to the room or sounds that you're experiencing. So rather than being caught up in the content of the sensory stimuli that you're being exposed to, you remain at the context where you're just remaining aware of all the things that are happening. So if you do this in a sense of meditation, you're doing it in a consistent pattern where as soon as you start to slip into the content, you catch yourself, because your intention to remain in the context is so strong in this 30-minute window that as soon as you start to slip into the content, you go, whoa, wait, I have an intention right now to stay in the context. You catch yourself, come back out. Okay, now you stay there and you just watch, and then you start to slip in, and then you, catch yourself, come back out. And then what this does is start to train you for life, for being out in life and being able to catch yourself and stay in that context. And that's what I call recognition. So with the meditation, you're taking basically a string of recognition moments and placing them back to back so that you can get into a deeper and deeper and deeper awareness. Recognition happens when you go throughout the day and you just take a quick 5-second, 10-second window of, what am I thinking right now? What am I feeling right now? My hands are on the table. The air is this certain temperature. Like, what sounds am I hearing? You just kind of take that second to come back into the context, pull yourself out of the story of the content that you're so attached to, creating that space so that you can now see things from a higher perspective. You do that enough and you stay consistent enough with a high enough intention that this becomes so automatic that something in your life will happen that will activate some sort of program of something you would have done in the past that would have not served you at all. It would have turned into something really bad. And you'll see it from this context instead of from the content. And the moment you do that, you realize how it is that you have been sabotaging yourself this entire time by continuing to buy into that thought and that emotion and that program. And then as soon as you see that, it's gone. You don't have to do anything to make it go away. Just that recognition alone will mean that you won't buy into it anymore. It will be gone. It won't be a part of your experience anymore.
Oh man, I could go on for like an hour about this. Let me try
It's good
to
stuff.
make this concise. So when you're going about your day, just taking time, and this applies to meditation too, but also can be throughout your day, taking time to pull back your awareness from everything that you were thinking about to becoming aware of what the hell is going on. So like in your body, what you're feeling, where you actually are in the world, like how your senses, what they're picking up, things like this, that can pull your awareness from the content of your thoughts to the context of, the world you're occupying.
Yeah, exactly. It pulls you back to the present moment, really, which is really all that ever exists. There is no future and past because that's all mental projection. It's all happening now. There is no other time that you could experience. You've never experienced anything in the future, and you've never experienced anything in the past. You can recall the memory of the past in the present moment, and you can project and think forward to the future in the present moment, but it's still all happening within the present moment. So once you recognize that, that pulls you out of believing that the thought that you're thinking about the future is reality and is true, because you recognize that it's just a thought. And you can create that if you continue to think it, and that thing might happen because you're continuing to perpetuate that energy that will bring it about. Or you can just come out of it, recognize that the only thing that ever exists is the present moment, be there, and then choose what serves you based on the energy levels, the energy feeling, the emotions of that present moment. And like I said, a lot of people would get confused by this and say that it's sort of irresponsible to just not think about the future. But like I said, if you're laying in bed thinking about the bills and worrying about them, you're actually blocking yourself from seeing a bunch of other thoughts that could easily solve your problem, because you're buying into the fear, and therefore that fear is blinding you from the truth of the situation. So it just, all in all, your mind becomes a tool. It becomes an instrument that you can use. The question is it using you, or are you using it? Are you buying into it and placing all of your awareness in the content of the thoughts and letting them whip you around? Or are you coming back and, like a bucking horse, a wild horse that needs to be broken, are you letting it buck until it decides to calm down because you're showing it, I'm not giving you the power, I am the master here? And that's ultimately what it takes, is that the habitual conditioned self is going to thrash around and try to throw you off the horse. And if you can just stay there and say, okay, go ahead, thrash all you want, I'm not going to give you my power, then it will start to obey you. And now you've become an effective human being. Now, for the first time, you're not insane. You actually come back to sanity for the first time in your life.
Yeah, there's the sanity, but then it also sounds like habit change, which is really at the core of everyone's life. This is the key to being able to change your behaviors and your habits, is to develop this awareness of the context you're operating in.
Exactly. And it's all habits. You're absolutely right about that. Yeah, because it's all conditioning. And what is conditioning? What are conditioned programs other than habits? The Pavlov dog will salivate because it's been habituated that when the bell rings, it will salivate. So it's just a habit. You practice it every single day. If you woke up every single day and did a handstand, well, after a month, 2 months, 3 months of doing that every day, it would become so ingrained as a habit that now you've developed that skill. So that the habit of becoming aware is just something that you have to continually recognize and do. And it's the most highest leverage. It's literally the highest leverage skill that you can develop, is to become aware, because all other habits, all other skills that you have are completely dependent upon your awareness. And you can change things in a heartbeat. You can change things so fast through awareness, but you can't change them that fast through action or through trying to effort your way through and force the body into doing what you want it to do, rather than understanding it and then therefore finding a better path.
I like it. So developing this awareness of context is sort of like the power versus force method of getting things done.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, and also ultimately, like, anything you do out of a negative emotion will just engender more negative emotion. So we talked before about like the progress, and we believe there's some external goal that we have to get to. Well, what is real progress is moving forward in joy to create more joy. Like that's really what the point of life is to experience and to create and to have fun and enjoy life. And so many people think that the purpose of life is to struggle and effort and suffer so that we can get to some external goal. What external goal are we trying to get to? If, you know, we think that we got to the moon, so that makes us better in some way. Well, is it bringing more joy to people? Is it something that we created, you know, the sculpture to be created out of joy, or did we create it in pain the entire time and then therefore look back on our life and say, why did I waste all this? Why didn't I enjoy the things that I had at the time that I had them?
It makes landing on the moon sound a little ridiculous when you talk about it like that. You're like, why?
It kind of does, yeah. But at the same time,
just kidding. I love the space program.
But at the same time, you know, that sort of expansion of like pushing the boundaries and exploring new lands and moving on to the moon, like
it's very
if
cool.
That's done in joy, that's great. That's so great.
Yeah.
But if it's for some external reason, then it's pointless.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of different viewpoints of why people do things. On one level, it certainly does seem crazy and kind of silly, and then on another, it's, you know, seems deeply profound. One thing I'm wondering about though is because I really want to get something even more useful in the day-to-day. And one thing I notice is you're talking about the bucking horse, that you need to tame it and be like, I'm not going to live in this world of content. Like, I'm going to reclaim, you know, my point of view over the content. I'm going to notice what's happening where I am. I'm going to get this awareness. What about, there's kind of two parts to this. One is, what do people have to do? When do they know that they have tamed this horse? You know, because I've heard that exact analogy used in a number of ways. A lot of people talk about it different, but everyone pretty much agrees that in order to be as effective as possible, even if you're just trying to ruthlessly achieve your goals, you still need to achieve that, at least in the context of the work you're doing, right? Mm-hmm. So if you don't care about anything in your life, but you want to write a novel, going back to the Stephen Pressfield example, you need to tame that bucking horse when you're sitting down to write, or you're never going to be as effective as you could be if you tamed it. But what about people who are addicted to escaping into those thoughts, escaping into the content? What about people that are addicted to that? It's like an escape for them. They want to be in their thoughts. They don't want to be aware of what's going on in their body, especially not their feelings that they haven't gotten in touch with in the last 8 years. Like, what do you say to those people?
That's a good question, because we all have these different escapes. I mean, that's the reason that the alcohol and drug industry is so big. It's the reason that even the entertainment industry is so big, is that everyone, you know, likes to get away from their life so that they can go have an hour of fun and not have to think about all the problems that they have. Yeah. And ultimately, that's not the worst thing in the world if it helps them to kind of unplug and come back to a higher place. But the question is, are they doing it from a place where they're trying to run away from their life without helping to fix it? Or can they use those escapes to unplug and come back to a higher level, so that when they dive back into their life, they're actually able to see it with an opportunity to release some things and to move it up? The question is that if the core of our lives are unhappy, and we're just trying to escape the unhappiness by going out and having these cheap little pleasures, well, that's a pretty limited way of living, because you have to come back to the core. You have to come back to your life. You can't live in escapism your entire life. And even then, you wouldn't enjoy that either, because wherever you go, there you are. So those things would creep back up. So the real question is, are you working on the core of your life? Are you working to let these things go and become a happier person? Or do you think that the escape is something that is just going to be a fix to your problem? If you put enough Band-Aids over this gushing wound, that you can just ignore it. Well, if you keep doing that, you're going to bleed out and you're going to die. You need to actually address the wound. You can't just continue to let it sit there. And so with these people, you know, we were talking about, I use the examples of the drug industry, alcohol industry, entertainment industry, but work is the exact same thing, where a lot of people will escape the problems by going into work and use that as some sort of way to escape their problems. So the question is, again, coming back to the emotional awareness, what emotions come up when you're working? Is there like this fear of like, I have to do this because I can't face this other thing? Or is there some sort of resistance of like, I should do this, but I don't want to? Do you feel that guilt of needing to earn your value? And so there's all these questions where whenever you're doing anything, literally every single present moment that unfolds, the eternal present moment that never stops unfolding, we can look at that present moment and say, in this exact present moment, which is always existing, what emotions am I feeling right now? Come back to that recognition, because what you'll end up finding is that those people who are escaping probably don't even realize that they're escaping. They just see, oh, this feels better, so I'm just going to go into this. And they're not really becoming aware of what they're doing.
Okay. So this is kind of like if you have a desire to do something that, you know, you seem to be having this behavior pattern of escaping into thoughts or, you know, distractions or what have you. Just again, it just comes back to trying to slowly bring more awareness to that and then trying to do it more consistently.
Yeah. And so like I think ultimately the thing you really want to focus on is just a consistent dedication, a consistent commitment to letting go, to whenever something negative comes up, to not falling into the temptation of of believing it and buying into the content, but to remain outside, because you have experienced enough times that when you let something go, it always feels amazing. It's always way, way better. You become so much more aware. It's the truth. If I give you a cheap plastic diamond and that's what you think value is, and the entire time, and that's what you think beauty is, and you're like, this is so beautiful, this cheap plastic diamond. And I say, well, if you give me that diamond, I'll give you the real diamond. But you have to let go of that cheap diamond that you thought was beauty the entire time. You're going to resist that. You're not going to want to give up that diamond because that's what you think beauty is. But when you're willing to let it go because you are willing to find the truth and to find the higher reality that exists beyond your perception, what you find is that I'll give you the real diamond. And now this real diamond is millions of times more beautiful than that cheap plastic thing. But you were unwilling to give that up because you didn't know any better. You were afraid of losing the known to have the unknown, which was so much better. So ultimately, that's what it comes back to, of what we want to do is we want to become willing to let go of those things at each present moment. So when we move into each task, when we sit down to write the novel, when we sit down with a friend over a cup of coffee, or we're laying in bed feeling that fear, that we have a dedication to become aware, to start looking at what emotions am I feeling right now, and are they serving me? And then ultimately what you find, going back to what you just said about the habitual self, how like changing your habits is so important, is that there's almost these two different aspects of you. There's the context-based awareness that chooses the level at which you wish to operate. And then there's the content-based person, who is the physical form that is the horse in the analogy of the bucking horse, that will follow whatever the context of the awareness places upon it. So the question is, do you want to be identified as the person, as the content that is at the mercy of whatever context happens to be by default? Or do you want to be the awareness that sets the context and allow the content of the person to unfold within your awareness? But that requires that you release your ego, and the ego is basically a false identification with a content-based person.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. That's interesting, because I've heard people say that about resistance too. It's like when you get resistance to something, pulling back to notice what context you're viewing this thing in. Like, are you looking at it like it's some big obstacle that you have to battle, or what's the context? That's interesting.
And to that point, I think it's really the ego wants to make everything so serious. So because to the ego, to the identified, the physical form, you're going to die. I'm going to die. Every single person is going to die. So the ego, in this sense, is a very frail and temporary identity that is inherently insecure. It's going to die one day. So it tries to grab onto things to gain security. Whereas when you're the awareness, you recognize that the ego will die, the person will die, but I won't die. I as the awareness, will stay forever and forever. And so therefore I can live in love and trust and faith and security no matter what's happening in the world, because I know that it's ultimately just a temporary, fleeting experience.
I like that. That's a good belief system. That makes me feel good. I like it.
Leads to good things. Yeah.
Yeah. Heck yeah.
Leads to a lot of good things.
So I want to, obviously we could talk all day, because I mean, you put a lot of thought into this stuff, man. It's really really valuable to hear your thoughts on it. But I want to sort of wrap it up. So I'd like to briefly talk about just kind of some of the work you've been doing with your clients, and the work you're doing on your channel, Amplified Vitality, as well. What's the focus now, and how is it different between the channel and the consulting, and what do you plan to do, in the near future with both of those parts of your business?
Yeah, so the message is continually unfolding in an amazing way.
Mm-hmm.
Taking all of this sort of awareness and disidentification from opinions or from scientific dogma or even mainstream nutritional dogma and those kind of things, by taking a step back and looking at them, a lot of new insights have been coming to me that are amazing, that I really want to share with people. And so these are core at the current state. They're very much based on the nutrition side of things. There's been some exercise and some lifestyle stuff coming from it as well. But ultimately, I see that the message is going to start to evolve into kind of where this conversation started, where it was like nutrition being in the game, the awareness being outside of the game. And so understanding both sides of those coin and making sure that they're working optimally together so that you can be as effective as you can possibly be. So that's kind of where the message is going right now. But I'm still really enjoying the scientific end of things, really diving into the actual physiology and biochemistry of how the body works. And a big part of that is just that's something that's always interested me. So when I get that rush of excitement from learning the new way that something works, like literally yesterday I was researching the renin angiotensin aldosterone system, which is like the main system that it's the main system that your body uses to like maintain blood pressure. Yeah. And like blood and like
water,
sodium and stuff like that.
Water, what is it?
Like water retention and water fluid dynamics or whatever you want to call it. But either way, so like
how diluted it is in the blood. I don't know the word. I can't think of it, man.
Like viscosity or
maybe that's it.
Or I don't know.
A lot of science words. Insert science word.
Either insert science word here. But to either extent, like I'll go down these rabbit holes of like really enjoying understanding the science, but then placing it and plugging that puzzle piece within the bigger picture and getting just this new clear understanding of like, this is the way that the human body works. This is the way that we've evolved. And like, here's how the bigger system works, like at depth too, not just like skimming the surface, but like really understanding it from deep levels. So, some people don't like to go deep. They just want very much more of like, tell me what to do kind of thing. So I'm trying to work my way towards more a balance between, being able to share the deep stuff without necessarily losing people in there. And so that's part of what having my consultations helps with, because I get to talk to people in a way that like, here's some actionables you can do. Let's see how it plays out for you in your life, tweak things, gain more data, and ultimately learn something. Because that's really the goal of it all, right?
That's super cool, man. I love it. I love it. And I know your YouTube channel has been like growing real quick. Super excited to see how that goes, man. I just think you have so much good stuff to say. Do you know if the videos just on the YouTube side are gonna focus more on nutritional or health? And have you decided like where on the depth practicality spectrum you're gonna kind of put those, or you're gonna test for a while?
It'll probably be, so like originally the channel was called Amplified Metabolism. It was very much aligned with the views of Dr. Ray Peat, for anyone who is familiar with his work. And so I was kind of teaching that model of thinking for a long time. And that is still at the core because he has a lot of good insight into things that, the mainstream nutrition kind of just looks over, and they're like, well, this theory completely destroys everything that you're saying. And it's like, they just kind of like, oh, well, don't worry about that. We're just going to continue saying what we're saying. I updated the channel name to Amplified Vitality because I wanted to start incorporating some of the more consciousness-based awareness type of things. Ultimately, I think that when you look at the literature on spontaneous healings from, spiritual growth or from awakening, that is so powerful that you can't deny its influence, that the way that you perceive the world is actually having an effect on your health. So the nutrition is very important, but ultimately, if I'm going to ask myself, what's the highest and best thing that I can do? Well, it's going to be sharing the stuff that's really going to have an immediate impact on people that, like this stuff we've been talking about, this awareness that can really change your life in drastically and very rapid ways. And so ultimately, I think that's probably where the channel is going to go. But I like I said, I'm always listening to my emotions, being as aware as I possibly can. So when new awareness has come to me and I can tell that, this thing's ready to pop, this thing's ready to go, I'm going to start doing this. Well, if it's not quite ready, there's a temptation of like wanting to rush it and be impatient. But
Yeah.
if you stay back in the context and recognize that emotion of impatience is just holding you back, then you can let it go. And as soon as you let go of the impatience, then the truth comes to you. And whether the truth is act now, or whether the truth is this is good because it's leading to something that will in the future be really good, either way, whether it happens now or happens in the future, you come to a place of peace, because now you come to a place where you can understand it and you can see clearly, and therefore you're not stuck in the negative emotion of impatience that's going to be blinding you from where you're moving. So it's kind of like my approach of my outlook. You know, it's worked so far for me. I've been enjoying what I've been doing as it's been unfolding, and it seems the stuff that I've been doing seems pretty high leverage. So, you know, there are definitely parts where I'm like wishing, you know, like, oh, well, maybe I should do this and just do it quicker. But then it always pays off when I follow the emotions and really let them go and understand that bigger context.
Yeah. Yeah, that approach has always served me well. I've just always viewed it in everything as like, what can I do that takes that mastery approach where the energy that's propelling this thing forward is self-perpetuating. You know what I mean? It's generating more energy in me than it's requiring, because otherwise forcing things is always a short term. In my experience, like some part of it is going to be a short-term approach that you can't continue at some point.
It's literally the stress metabolism that we're talking about. It's the exact same pattern of trading your future for the now. You need the energy now, so you trade the well-being of the organism for some immediate energy so that you can get away. And in the short term, if you need to get away from a stress, that's fine. But in the long term, it's going to degrade your systems if it's left on too long. So the same thing's happening within your consciousness. Ultimately, you are energy. So when we're talking about doing things that have a greater return on your energy, well, what that really means is doing things that are more in alignment with who you truly are. And, you know, what's the difference between a piece of wood, a dead piece of plywood, and a tree? Well, the tree has energy flowing through it. The tree is alive. That livingness of the tree is what its identity is. That's what it is. It's life. So we are life. We're not dead organisms. A dead body has the life force removed from it, because who that was is no longer in that body. So who you are is in your body. And the more energy you feel, the more joy you feel, the more present who you really are as life is within your physical form. And when you die, you remove yourself from the physical form. Negative emotions are this like half death, where you're half pulled out, you're constricted. It's like putting a tourniquet on your arm and your arm turns blue. You're cutting off the life force to your arm. Well, this organ, the organism, is a portion of your totality of who you are. And when you cut off by using negative thinking, cut yourself off from who you truly are, then you start to die. Just like the arm starts to turn blue, you start to shut down all the complex systems of your body that are really how the human was evolved and designed to function.
Damn, I like that. That's like so concrete too. That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Oh, I gotta get on your consulting roster. No, but if people do want to hire you to do either nutrition or, you know, health and wellness coaching, depending on what you're offering right now, I'll have to look at that. Or they just want to view your videos, or they're interested in any upcoming content that you're going to be putting out, where should the people go? Where should I send them?
So the main thing I would say is the YouTube channel, which is Amplified Vitality. Lots of good videos on there, especially the recent ones have been, they're very science-minded, very nutrition-oriented, but also philosophical like this. So it also helps you to get that bigger picture and a bigger understanding of how the human body works. That's probably the best place to see the videos. I also have a Patreon account, which is the same name, Amplified Vitality. And on there, I have a monthly newsletter that you can check out. It's the first edition was released in October. The next edition is coming out in November. Everyone who's gone through it has had raving reviews. They've been really enjoying that deeper level of understanding nutrition, even beyond what I can talk about in videos, because, you know, written word, there's a little bit more of an opportunity to go deeper and to be able to formulate the argument and the words in better ways. So everyone who's been going through the newsletter has been really enjoying that. So if any of you listening are interested in that, go check that out for sure. And then as far as consultations, I'm not really promoting that a ton. I'm doing that as people who come to me and seem like they're good fits and I want to work with them. So if anyone is interested in that, they can email me at timothyvberzins@gmail.com. I can give you that email so you can put it on the show notes or wherever it is that you publish. So, but that's where I would reach out to me and make some contact.
We'll do that. I'll put it in the show notes. And I'm gonna cut the recording and we can chat after. But Tim, I wanna thank you again for coming on to talk to me, man. I really appreciate you taking some of the time out of your day.
Dude, definitely. Like I said, I love having these conversations, and this was a really good one. You know, I get a lot of benefit out of this as well. Like some of these things that they're deeper ways of seeing them. It's not even stuff that I've thought out before. It kind of comes to me in the moment through a good conversation. So, you know, I get a lot of benefit out of this as well. And so I really appreciate you having me on here.
Definitely.